2, 1. Rachel Peterson, welcome to the Map It Forward podcast.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
I am very excited about this conversation. In a week where a lot of turmoil has happened in the world, and the very tragic passing of one of my heroes, it's really great to talk to a woman in power in coffee and just be able to share this space with you and talk about your journey and talk about so much of the really cool stuff that you've done and how you've built this journey. And so I'm stoked to be having this conversation with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lee. Yeah, we were just talking a little bit before we started going live about how difficult this last week has been. Passing of Ruth later Ginsburg and the future for girls and women, but girls more than anything, in my opinion, in the United States and worldwide, because this doesn't only affect the United States, it affects women's rights. It's going to affect women's rights everywhere. For me, that is definitely something that is just so very close to my heart. And I have been so saddened by her passing and by what that might represent to women's rights going forward.
It echoed across the world. I noticed that my friends in Australia were deeply saddened by the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg because of what it represented for everything that we've been trying to build over the last number of decades. I'm a woman in my 40s. My mother's generation was the generation that all got married very young. They were kept at home having babies, and owning a business wasn't anything that they had kind of aspired to at all. We're the first generation that really can decide not to have children on our own, support ourselves, be in marriages if we choose to be in marriages. We can own homes without having our husbands to co-sign for them. We can have passports without our husbands having to co-sign for them. It's women like Ruth Bader Ginsburg who really forged ahead with allowing us to dream like this. And generations, we had hoped that the generations that came after us would have the good fortune to take these things for granted, because equality was just a thing in the future. But that's not what it is for us. We still remember, right?
Absolutely, yes. And the whole problem is, it's a huge chunk of things, because a lot of people see it and they just think Roe v. Wade. And that's huge for sure.
Absolutely.
Too. But it's not the only thing. I mean, she's pushed women's rights to a place where we can go ahead and talk about things like this on this podcast. And it's something that people know what we're talking about. So, and we wouldn't have been able to do that 30 years ago, or it's just her work changed our life and the future of ourselves and our kids. And I just would hope that these would be given rights going forward. And it just doesn't seem like that's going to be true. So that to me is the scary part.
And you've got a daughter and a son.
I do.
Both educated, both, forging their way in the world. What concerns you about, I guess, particularly your daughter's future, not having someone like RBG in the here to fight for her?
She was able to, because of RGB's work, she was able to do a lot of things, like become a highly educated person, and she's still going for more education. And in her case, I think, well, she made it. She's fine. She's going to be okay. She got her education. She knows her rights. And I'm just worried about what will go after this. I mean, I feel like she made it through right at the right time, but I don't know what the future is going to bring. I don't see in the next couple of years, the whole justice system. I don't see women judges. I don't see that happening. So I don't know at what point this is going to change where the positions of power, and for these decisions that affect women, that are women's rights, and that only women should be deciding about. They're not the place for the man to decide, and they're certainly not the place for especially a male-run government to decide. I mean, it's not a government's decision, in my opinion. What a woman does with her body, one way or the other, and women's rights should be exactly the same as men's rights. I mean, what we do with our body is between us and whatever we believe in.
I agree with you 600%. And for any, people who sit on the right that are going to have a problem with what I'm saying, I respectfully ask you to just allow me to have my opinions, but I am pro-choice. I'm a libertarian. It's about the only category I put myself in. That I believe you should have the right to choose whatever the fuck you want for yourself.
I do too. I do too. And to me, it's clear, but not to.
No. So for people who are listening to this and saying, why is it such a big deal for women to be represented? Like, you don't have it so bad, right? Look at all the things you've got now compared to what you used to not have.
Yeah, exactly. That's the comparison.
Exactly.
But if not, let's compare it to actually what other people that are a different gender have. Why do they get paid more? Or why do we get talked over all the time? Why do we get pushed down a little bit to listen to? Maybe this is not the best thing to go into, because I really only wanted to talk about women's rights and how difficult and how sad I have been in the last couple of days, thinking about what is to come and what the future is going to bring in terms of something so important, something that just should be part of our life right now and should already be established that it is our right. But we perhaps should talk about coffee.
Well, but this leads into coffee. This is why I'm fine talking about this right now, because this idea of equality in coffee is something that I have been wrestling with for quite some time, many years. And as I've had this podcast over the last 2.5 years, exploring the role of women at the producer end of the coffee value chain is really tied quite nicely in with what we were just talking about. And I struggle, and I work so hard to try and get women to come on this podcast. And what we have a lot of the time is women saying, but I don't really have anything relevant to talk about, or I'm not really that important, or it's not really that big a deal what I've got to say. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg flipped the narrative on that.
Yeah. And
I've tried so hard to get so many women on this podcast. I really have. Sorry?
I'm surprised by that. I would have thought more women in the coffee industry, because I think the coffee industry is a little bit more progressive in general than the rest of than let's say the United States in general. So I'm surprised by that. And that's sad.
Yeah, it really is. Look, it shocks me every time that I contact a woman and say, will you come on the podcast? And their response is what I just said. It's like, but no, listen, the reason we need more women on this podcast is because the more women there are, the more inspired other women are going to get. The more normalized it feels. I need for women to know that success is normal for women. It's harder to attain. I'm not saying equity. Equity is very different from equality or equal opportunity, sorry. We have more hurdles. I definitely know, as the owner of 3 businesses, how much harder I have to push up to get the same kind of success as other men. But I'm doing that and you're doing that so the women that come after us don't have to fight as hard to get the same kind of results, right?
Well, that's exactly how I feel. We normalize it, and it should be normal.
Yeah.
I remember when I graduated from high school, I had to choose a college to go to, and I didn't have a lot of options because I didn't apply to a lot of places. Let's say I had done my senior year of high school in California because I had gone for an exchange. It's a long story. To Switzerland for a year, and Panama wouldn't take my grades, so I had to go to the U.S. where they would take my grades from Switzerland, and I lived with an aunt there for a year. And when I decided to choose my school, I had applied to 3 schools and I was accepted to 2 of them. One was UC Berkeley and one was Wellesley College in Boston. Even though maybe in retrospect now, I probably wouldn't have made the same choice, I went to Wellesley. And I really am very happy that I did. And the reason that I did is at Wellesley, women get the opportunity to speak up. Nobody tells them, nobody speaks over them, nobody questions the validity of your questions. For 4 years, it gave me the knowledge that, yes, I have the right to speak in any setting. I can talk. Because at Wellesley, that was normal. And then you go out of there and you're like, well, these things are happening and it doesn't sound like people want me to talk, but I know that I can talk. Uphill battle.
I'm interested at the cultural journey you've taken because you are multicultural is the perfect word to describe you. You have the Swede background, you have the Panamanian influence, you have the American influence, and they're very different cultures.
They are. But honestly, I have to tell you, I was thinking about this a little bit on the way driving to work this morning to the farm from my house. And I was thinking, yeah, but I really, really do. What's the word? I feel like I'm part of all 3 of those.
You can tell.
Like I feel American, I feel Panamanian, and Swedish to a lesser degree, but I also feel a strong affinity with Swedes and especially with the Scandinavian culture. So to me, all 3 of those are a representation of who I am. I wouldn't be able to say, I feel like I'm from Panama for sure. I grew up most of my life here. There's a combination of things. You can't just put into one little box. So I do feel all of those cultures, they've certainly influenced who I am today. And I take them into account very seriously, all of those influences. They've formed me.
As a woman who was raised in Australia but by Arab parents.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And now living in America is very strange, I have to tell you. Having 3 cultures influence you continues to mold you into these and really challenge what your base belief structures are and what the way that you view all the other different cultures. Certainly living here in America has challenged everything that I know about being informed by the Australian and the Syrian culture. And being Syrian has informed the way I was raised as in the Australian culture. And now over here in America, everything seems to be flipped on its head. So I'm definitely undergoing a kind of a cultural rebirth for myself, and I'll be heading back to Australia in January, moving back home.
Oh, wow.
Right. In a very tumultuous time. But I was raised with the belief that women are less than men. It was told to me every day. It was demonstrated by the patriarchal kind of influences I had in my life. But your father was on the farm, right? Your father was your father a banker?
No,
my
grandfather
was a banker. Your career was it encouraged by your father? Was your success encouraged by your father? How did the male structures in your life pave a path for you?
Well, so I grew up here on the
Mm-hmm.
farm. I have two brothers. I have an older brother and I have a younger brother. So I was sort of in the middle. My younger brother is substantially younger. He's 6 years younger, but he is actually the person who is the general manager here at
Mm-hmm.
the farm. Um, this is hard to sort of figure out a way to say it. I wasn't discouraged from being successful at all. It was certainly expected from me that I would go to college and that I would
Mm-hmm.
graduate. And from there going forward, whether or not I married at that point wasn't so important or had kids. Um, I was free to do whatever I wanted to do. I did end up getting married, had two kids, got divorced 10 years later. My kids are grown. I moved back to Panama. I was living in Puerto Rico when I got
Mm-hmm.
married. Um, and when this actually all ties into coffee. So I was in 2004 when we first discovered geisha here
Yeah.
at the farm, and my younger brother was the one who discovered it. I wasn't here at that moment. In 2005, my father started saying, you know what, we need to get somebody who's going to be able to market this coffee. We don't know what we're doing. We should hire some external consultant to come in. We'll pay him for 6 months out of the year to market. And he even had a price range up there, which was high for Panama. And I said, you know what, Dad? I can do it.
What had you
And he was
studied
like,
at university?
okay. So I studied psychology and French. I wasn't real clear on what I wanted to do. And it's not, again, something I would study again, but I was still growing up, to be honest.
But
I
psychology is
still didn't
great
know
for
what I wanted
marketing.
to do. Yeah. So yeah, psychology worked out great. Okay, it wasn't something conflicting. But I didn't really have anything solid. I did work in marketing in Puerto Rico after when I got married. I worked for about a year
Mm-hmm.
and a half. And then I did a whole bunch of other stuff. Like I was actually a commercial real estate
Go,
appraiser.
girl. That's fantastic.
In 2005, when this thing happens, and I said to my dad, I can do this. I can
Yeah.
do this. He's like, eh. And I'm like, yeah, you sure? So,
Watch me.
so meanwhile, at that point, I was like, listen, what we'll do is I will make a percentage off of sales. You won't pay me for anything that is not an actual thing that I'm
Uh-huh.
doing. Like, so if I sell coffee, I'll make a percentage off of the sale of the coffee. And I was able to evolve into this. I went around to people and asked, and right now, if you ask him, he's actually in the office across from me, he can't hear me, but I don't think he would probably remember
No,
that
of
way.
course
I know
not.
that was the way he was.
It was like an
And
admin thing
now
that she
he's
did.
super proud. He's very happy about what's going on
Yeah, I'm
now. But
sure.
that
After
I remember how it happened.
after your auction results in July, I'm pretty sure that everyone's very happy with everything that you've done. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank
Really,
you,
really
thank
well
you.
done.
Yeah. So yeah, that right now I would certainly say between a combination of, again, going back to Wellesley telling me, yes, you're good, you are a woman and you can say what you want, you're smart, you need to let people know that you are that way. That in addition with having been able to be here and do the work that I've done in coffee, I think that a combination of those things have made here in my family, at least, an evolution on women's roles in life
I
and work.
There are very few coffees that I remember the first time I tasted them. But your farm was the first time I tasted a coffee. This was going back probably around 2006. This was the first time as a barista I asked somebody where this coffee came from.
Where did you taste
I
it?
was in Sydney
Ah,
and I was either working for Campos or for Toby's estate. And I tasted this coffee and of course, it was a geisha. It was the first time I'd ever tasted it. And it may even have been Toby himself that gave it to me. I can't even remember. But I remember sipping it thinking, what the fuck just happened? And then I asked where did this coffee come from? And they told me about Hacienda La Esmeraldas. And I went, oh my God, I'm going to remember this name for the rest of my life.
That's good.
Well, and that was when I started to realize the farm is really, really important. And I think in our careers, because the barrier to entry is so low in our industry, we don't really have this trajectory of information that you need to learn in order to become an adequate coffee professional that's well informed, and that can then go and pass that information on to consumers and other participants in the value chain. And so we kind of accidentally stumble across things like the supply chain and how important it is, and, you know, how to describe flavor in great detail, and all of these little hidden gems that we really should understand before we can call ourselves a professional. Finding your coffee was the moment that I realized there's something more to this than just me. It was the thing that knocked me off my ego perch. And I'm really grateful for that. And I realized at that time I started looking into how come, because at the time you were, from what I could see, you were the only marketing trailblazers around. You were doing things very differently to the way that everybody was doing them.
Well, that is a combination of us having a product that nobody else had, and decisions that we made here, like us doing the first single estate auction, which was, I think, in 2008. Mm-hmm. And that type of activity just opens up the doors for everybody in the world to be able to participate, be a part of what you're doing. So I don't know. We did become famous because of Best of Panama. We won 2004, 2005, 2006, I think 2007, and then we didn't participate in 2008 when we did our own auction. And I think we won 2009 and 2010, and then 2010 we didn't participate. In 2011 it was the first time we came in second. That there were geishas out there, other geishas to compete with. And since 2011, off and on, we've won. Sometimes we've lost. Other times we've won most in the natural geisha category than in other categories. But we still try. We still compete. We do think it's important to keep putting yourself out there. You can't just sit back and say, okay, I did this, so I deserve something. You always have to be able to compete with your product. Your product has to be good enough to compete. I mean, that's the way I think that it should be. So we keep trying. There's much better coffees coming out than we ever had before, because we've studied in the lands where we produce coffee what we need to get better cups of coffee. And among those things, unfortunately, elevation is one of the biggest things, which is, I say unfortunately because normally those elevations go into parts where we have protected areas already, right. Here in Panama and in other countries. So you can only go to a certain elevation without getting into park, which, you know, there's some coffees already in the parks, but it's important to preserve our ecosystems as well. So we have a lot of new information on processing, what happens during processing, in dry process, wet process, what's happening with the embryo, how, you know, what is going on that's bringing these different tastes. So I do think we've come a long way with everything that has to do with the quality of what we're offering. What you remember in 2006 was probably 3 points under what we produce now, but people don't remember it that way because it was such a surprise back in, I remember 2004, I first tasted it. 2005, I remember more because I was already working here. You just put that geisha coffee next to any other coffee in the world, and people are going to identify it immediately and say, wow, it tastes like flowers. It tastes like blueberries, some people say, even though it's not a common descriptor right now. But it was very easy to educate here on the cupping table. It was so easy. Everybody could tell. It was mind-blowing. to everybody. So it's funny when people come back to me like, oh, I want it to be like that first cup in 2000 and whatever. Normally it's between 2004, 2006. I'm like, but what you're tasting is so much better. But the memory of that first time is almost impossible to compete.
It's it's like that God moment that you have, that you're like, this is a flavor memory that's going to be imprinted on me forever. The only other coffee that I had that same experience with was a Nikise. Nikise from Ethiopia.
Oh, okay.
It was, I remember pulling it, and I'm not an espresso drinker because I find it a bit too aggressive. And I remember even pulling this coffee as an espresso. What had happened was I was living in Hollywood. This was going back about 10 years ago. I was living in Hollywood at the time. Don't judge me. Like I was living in the clusterfuck of Hollywood, right on Hollywood Boulevard. Not my proudest moment. My friend was roasting coffee in Sydney, and this was the first time he had tasted Nikise. He spent the money to overnight the bag to me. He was that impressed with it. And he said, you have to taste this coffee. He overnighted it from Sydney to me, and I tasted it. And even as an espresso, this tasted like an explosion of blueberry juice. And I'll never forget that moment. And the first time that I tasted your coffee. They're the only two that I've kind of gone, holy shit, this is incredible.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you were to ask me what exactly all the flavor profiles of all of that right now, it wouldn't matter. It really wouldn't matter. It's the memory of the moment that afforded me, right? I feel very fortunate to have experienced those things. And every person I handed those coffees to had a similar experience. This is like the magic of coffee, right?
I found that similar experience in the coffee industry, but I do not find that similar experience with people who are not in the coffee industry. So that's where education has to come in. People who are not in the coffee industry, you put them a cup of, our local brand, which is Seconds normally, the biggest local brand here in Panama. Maybe not Seconds, but certainly not. It's commercial quality coffee. And you put my geisha, even the best one, and let's say a 93-point geisha next to it, they're going to go for this commercial brand quality.
Yep.
So it's just a matter of education and a matter of explaining to people you're just tasting something that you're not supposed to be looking for in coffee, but it's really difficult to, like, one of my best friends actually is like, he will not get off of that stuff. And I smell it walking into his house. Like, how can you even drink that?
I can so relate.
I tried, and he's like, I don't like it. That doesn't taste like coffee.
It hurts my heart when one of my best friends says to me, let's go for a coffee, because he likes like really, really dark roasted, second wave-ish kind of coffee. And I'm like, well, can we just pick somewhere that has good tea?
Yeah. Good idea. Yeah.
You can have the coffee, I'll have the tea because, it's slim pickings.
It's very difficult for me to drink when even the second wave ones. I mean,
there's not going to happen.
They have the bunches of milk and stuff in there that you can actually don't taste like the coffee. You just get the caffeine buzz and sugar.
Yeah, thank you. But for people who are unaccustomed to understanding that coffee has the opportunity to take you on an actual flavor experience rather than the flavor of coffee. Which is why, like, this is, have you heard of Elixir? Elixir Specialty Coffee. Yeah. This is my company. And the great thing about this is every coffee that you use to make Elixir, it takes away the coffee flavor and just takes you on the flavor profile experience.
Really?
Yeah, I should try and send you some.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Because we're going to be winding up Elixir here in the US and relaunching
Right.
back in Australia, which I
Are you in Melbourne or are you in
Sydney.
Sydney?
In Sydney.
Nice.
Yeah. And I'm incredibly excited about relaunching Elixir back in Australia.
Great.
Yeah. Look, I think there's going to be a lot of challenges here for businesses with the economic crash that's impending over here, and Australia's not going to be feeling it anywhere near as bad. And so to be able to go over there, take my 2 podcasts with me as well as this company and just thrive over there is just really exciting. So
I hope that does. Yeah, that sounds like a great move right now.
it just feels a little more like stable footing under your feet. And because this isn't my country, what's happening here isn't really, it's not my business. You know what I mean?
I understand what you're saying. Yes. We can't really go and publicly talk about this because people are going to say, you know what, go home. Because that's the big thing right now.
I wish I could. I don't have anything to contribute here that would help fix the problems that are here. And so, it's the Arab in me that, we have a saying, if it's not your business, leave. And that's kind of how I feel about it. I am very grateful for a lot of the challenges that I've had here. They've taught me a lot about who I am and how to build a business and how not to build a business and et cetera, et cetera. But we've got some shit that I need to go and contribute to being a part of the solutions for back home in Australia. So that's where I can be the best help. But the podcast is global. So it doesn't matter where I'm doing that. But going back to what I was saying, the thing about Elixir that's great and that we've experienced is it's for the connoisseur and it's also for the person who's looking for a gateway into specialty coffee.
But what do you do? Can you explain the process to me?
No, it's proprietary. It's proprietary.
Perfect. So I would love it if you could send some. I would love it. I mean, our regular mail is not working, but
we'll figure it out. We'll figure something out. I'll there's a couple of people who I want to send it to before I leave, all producers. So I'll make sure that you're one of the people that we send our last couple of Elixir trees. My absolute pleasure. But the challenge is, I think that in coffee we have a branding problem, as with this word coffee. I think that because we call instant coffee, we call cold brew coffee, we call espresso coffee, we call roasted coffee, we call drip coffee, we call Elixir coffee. It's all coffee. And you can't expect somebody who typically spends $2 on a cup of coffee, however they term that word coffee, to understand the gateway from there to a cup that costs $25. But it's coffee, right? And then they taste it and they're like, hold on, this doesn't taste anything like actual coffee. This tastes like coffee juice, maybe. I've had someone describe it as hot coffee juice. It's got too many flavors in it. I just want coffee. And I think that we have to do better in marketing the differences between coffee.
Yeah, that's true. And I've never thought of that, actually. That there are tons of things that are
coffee.
Everything is called coffee.
Right.
From ranch, the fruit is called coffee. Yes, and instant coffee, of course, and commercial brands of coffee.
And coffee bags.
Yes. Yeah.
But all of them elicit a different response from this complex agricultural product once we brew it. And they all taste different. Even the same coffee brewed many different ways and roasted different ways is going to elicit a different flavor experience. And we've done a terrible job as an industry of communicating that to our consumers. And I think that given a lot of the climate shifting challenges that we've got going on and that producers are going to experience long term, we have to find a way to support the consumer end adopting, paying higher prices for coffee so that we can reinvest back into the supply chain, particularly at the lower end of the producer spectrum.
Yeah.
Because unless we start doing this, people aren't going to understand how we need to heal what's going on. It's not sustainable,
I agree.
right?
I absolutely agree. One of the topics that comes up pretty often. So there's there's these auction prices that Panama geisha will get, like recently $1,300 a pound,
and 50 cents.
Or
they were very particular about the 50 cents. I giggled every time that was like 1,350 cents. I'm like, okay, we got it.
Yeah. But then it's a pushback sort of all over the place to those types of prices. Yeah. But this is the reality of how we got here. In 2004, during our first Best of Panama auction, the price went up to $21 a pound at a time when it was, well, just like now, it's around $1 on the sea. I mean, honestly,
like?
Back then I think it was a little lower, but it's terrible right now. It
really is.
I mean, let's be honest, in the last 15 years, nothing has changed. No. So what was interesting that year is that when we got $21 a pound, the whole coffee industry was just... They couldn't believe it. There were roasters groups that were talking about it. I could find it everywhere on the internet. People were discussing it. It was just a huge breakthrough in price to get $21 a pound. And I've always repeated this. To me, that was the initial moment where that glass ceiling broke and where we were okay to all of a sudden have coffee prices that were very different to what we'd had previously. That is not as important as the fact that as these coffee prices started going up for the higher end coffees, at least here in Panama and in many other countries around here, prices also started to themselves to varietals that were different, interesting coffees, even traditional coffees. Here in Panama, now you have a relatively high elevation catuai, natural or washed, you can sell it for $10 a pound. And I'm talking, if you put that into a comparison of what we would be selling it for if it was on the sea, these exorbitant prices only break open the space for coffee prices of lower or of qualities that are perhaps not super to actually have value. Yeah. So I also said this many times. 2004, we had our first VOP win. 2007, we were still in the red. People think that just because you have a couple pounds of geisha, all of a sudden everything turned into, So yes, we did at good prices, but you know what? We have all this other coffee that we're losing money
Wilfred Lamustas, Senior and Junior, came on and spoke about this. They were like, I just want everyone to be very clear. We're not driving Ferraris and Lamborghinis.
And I'm not going to say right now that we still have losses in coffee. I mean, we sell a lot of the coffee for under our costs of production, but we sell a lot of it for way over our cost of production. So it has put us in a solid place where we can take this money that we're receiving, we can put it back into our costs, we can put it back into our housing for the people who live with us, our programs, educational programs. We have 2 schools that we pay for almost entirely that are to both sides of our farms. We do scholarship programs up all the way through university. We have all these benefits that we can now add because you know what, we're making money, so we can. Before, people are like, you have to have all these social programs. It's like, you know what, we're already in the red and we're supposed to take out extra money to make sure that we have, because here in Panama, we have the housing for them. They live on our farms, so we have to make sure that they have health, that they have food, that they have education during the time.
And you want to. When you can, it's not just that you have to. The challenging thing about what I'm noticing with regards to the conflict that's happening between employers and employees right now in the coffee industry. Employees seem to be a lot of the time right now waging war against employers who have to let them go and they lose benefits and things like that. I keep trying to reiterate to people, like, listen, as business owners, we want to give you everything we can afford to give you. It's in our vested interest for you to be happy. But it's not just in our vested interest. We want that. We're building businesses because we want the people who are helping us build them to thrive. We want you to be happy. We're building an ecosystem where we all rise together. But we can't do that if the rug's been pulled out from under us. We can't do that if we're in the red. It's irresponsible of us to do that if we're not making money. And to get to the point where you're making money takes fucking years. And no sleep and eating brown rice for many years in a row, and sometimes having to go without getting paid for long periods of time so that you can get paid.
Yeah.
That's the reality of building businesses. Like the Wilfred Senior was saying, we almost lost everything many times. Like generations have almost lost everything in our family for us to get to the point where we are now at least able to make sure that we have all these social programs and that we're reinvesting in what we're doing. But the road was very difficult to get here.
Yes. No, that's absolutely true. We had, when we got into coffee, we had coffee and dairy at the same time, because half of our farm is dairies. Yeah. And during all of those years, dairy pulled us through. Yeah. We would have not, if we were only in coffee, we would have absolutely gone on. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that, I think that Panama has, fortunately, we found a way that we found this variety and we were able to go through, and all of Panama has benefited from that. And I just think that if other countries are able to get, not even talking about $3.50 a pound for their coffees, that's a decent life for people.
Yeah.
And until we get to that point, I just think we're just not talking about anything that's real, because you want to be honest, you want to keep paying $1.50, $1.75, $2. You're keeping people in poverty. There's just no ways around.
Well, and you're investing in the demise of an industry.
Yes.
This is the challenging aspect of it for me, is it's very short-sighted. If you're participating in that level of fuckery, you're not understanding that you're cutting your nose off to spite your face.
Yes. I don't really know how. I've wondered for 15 years or 16 years how this can be changed, or how we can disassociate from the sea, or how we can find a way that makes sense for coffee growers to be paid. But I don't know.
Have you come up with any kind of an answer?
I don't have any idea why we're associated with the sea in the first place. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with production or lack of production or anything that we do or don't do. So we can't affect that. We can't change that. We were on this, we of course sold based off of the sea until 2007, most of our coffee. And again, at a loss. Those containers would leave here. They would pay us maybe $1.75, or say back when it cost us, I remember the pennies. It cost us $1.45 and we were getting $1.32. So that is 16 years ago, 17 years ago. As costs have evolved here, costs have become higher. We can no longer. I'm going to even say that back then we had a lot. Our bags were the cheapest. We used the cheapest transportation, etc. Nowadays, some of our costs have gone up because we want to be able to make sure that the container that we are sending our coffee to in Panama is a perfect container and it's not going to leak. Well, you've got to pay for the most expensive shippers then. So and that kind of stuff. So those prices go up in that type of. But the industry needs to find a way to change if they want to have coffees that are good quality, not necessarily ultra specialty, just a good quality 82 coffee. People aren't willing to pay. They're not willing to pay more than $2 for that. In my experience, that I still have coffees like that. There are some people who will, but great majority, no.
And this is, I think at the core of this problem is this issue of barrier to entry. Because, and I'm working very hard to formulate an education program next year that helps new business owners. We've got a huge influx of new business owners into the consumer end of the coffee business right now. And I'm not excited about it purely because this pandemic was, for all intents and purposes, a much needed recalibration for our industry, for the consumer end businesses. There are a lot of zombie businesses that were operating that really needed an invitation to say, hey, listen, take a minute, close your doors. Don't be buried under the stress of this. Take the exit strategy that you're being offered right now and blame it on the pandemic. And that exit strategy was taken by quite a significant number of people. And what would have been a potentially positive, I don't like that word, but encouraging is probably the best word. What would have been an encouraging position for our industry had that have been allowed to play out the way that it did, unaffected by what came next, would have been that the customer base would have been able to then go and patron the businesses who were very in touch with good supply chain practices, running sustainable business, financial literacy, understanding how to build cultures and support professionalism with their employees. Unfortunately, what happened was a huge exit from the corporate world has happened. And now we have a huge number of people coming out of corporate saying, well, fuck that. I don't want to be part of the corporate structure anymore. I've always loved coffee. I'm going to go be a coffee roaster. And so now we have a huge number of small scale boutique roasters opening up that are going to create the same problems and mistakes that the generations that came before them, which is they're going into this thinking, well, how hard can it be? I'll learn how to roast. I'll take the money that I got from being laid off. I'll buy a roasting machine. I'll set it up in my garage and I'll just start selling coffee to my friends and my neighbors and all of those kind of people. And, you can buy coffee really cheap. So the barrier to entry is very low.
Yeah.
And because the barrier to entry is so low and they don't have to understand the damage that they're doing by participating in a value chain that I'm not saying don't buy cheap coffee. What I'm saying is don't buy coffee that you're not paying a fair price for. If your price entry point is $2 a pound, is $3 a pound, make sure that you've done the due diligence to ensure that the importer has paid a fair price for that coffee to the value chain up to the time that it gets on the ship.
That's hard. That's
absolutely
hard.
And this
and I'm going to be honest, at this point in my life, some leverage because people know me and because they know the farm. I remember back when I was trying to sell to importers. It is not easy. It's not fun. If you don't have leverage, you don't have language skills, or how do you know?
Right. But we have to fix this problem.
Right. We do. That's what I agree on. But while we still consider that it's okay to pay, in my opinion, less than $3.50 a pound for these coffees, we're going to have a problem.
With Elixir, it retails at $8 US a bottle. And people, people in the coffee industry say that's outrageous. It's outrageous that you sell an 8-ounce bottle of coffee for $8. And my response to them is, we pay more than a fair price for coffee. We pay more than a fair price to our roaster. All our employees are paid well. And we make sure that we don't have any bills that are overdue. In order for us to do that, though, we have to price our product correctly. And if you were pricing your lattes correctly and paying a fair price for the coffee, you would be pricing a latte at $8 as well.
Exactly. And that's what should be happening. But that's exactly where we have our problem. So people don't want to raise the prices on coffee. And if you don't raise the prices on coffee, it has to go. I wish it started at the bottom up and we could just sell all of our coffees. Everybody could sell their coffees at 80-point coffee at $3. And under that, I don't know what the price would be. But let's say 80 plus, or 80 points or more, you sell it at $3 or $3.50 a pound. Everybody has to rise their prices, their resale prices. And as long as, I don't know, I know that there's a lot of places that still think that they should be they're entitled to a 50-cent cup of coffee. And that's the pity of how we've evolved in the coffee world. There's still some sort of a romantic idea attached to a 50-cent cup of coffee.
Yeah. And that goes back to my branding thing. That's coffee, and a $5 latte with oat milk in it is coffee.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it is. You're right. They are. They are all coffee.
And I don't know who should take the lead on. Should it be the Specialty Coffee Association that takes the lead on a marketing campaign? Should it be somebody else, like an agricultural community, that takes the lead on that kind of campaign?
I would hope it would be the Specialty Coffee Association, but I don't know, because it's maybe not in the interest of all of I think it is all of the coffee industry, actually. Right. So I would say yes, the Specialty Coffee Association should take on that role. I think that is just a basic step that should have been taken a long time ago, but it needs to be taken soon. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've mentioned it to them, and it just doesn't seem to be doesn't even register. But it has to get done.
Well, yes, it does have to get done.
So I don't
know about this year, though. This year, and what I have noticed is that there is a lot of people buying now for home consumption. That's what a lot of my buyers, roasters, are telling me. So it also seems like an ideal moment to go out and say to those home consumers, hey, listen, this is how you should prepare your coffee. This is how you'll make it taste good, like you want it to be, like it would be if you were at the cafe. Or education. Education is just a lot.
We have these, part of the initiative of Map It Forward is one of our offerings is we have mastermind groups. So we have mastermind groups for business owners and we have mastermind groups for coffee roasters. And in our mastermind groups, we have 2 of them for business owners. A number of them are brand new roasters that are coming in that don't want to do it the shitty way. And so what we're doing as they roll out those businesses, we're putting together a brewing strategy, how they're going to communicate that brewing strategy to the consumer so that because they're learning, these guys are coming out of corporate, they're opening their own business as coffee roasters, they're learning about this new journey, having been avid consumers of specialty coffee around the world and coming at this now from the other side. And I think you might really enjoy their brand. It's perspectiveroasters.com. I'll send you a link. Because they're looking at it from the perspective of, so one of them is a creative genius, the other one is an analytical genius. So they're approaching coffee from the analyst and the artist.
That's great.
Yeah, and they're presenting the perspective of the coffee from those 2 different ways of viewing it. And they're using that as a mechanism to communicate the intensity and the nuance of the kind of coffee they're presenting and why specialty coffee is different. And they're taking them on this journey in a very unpretentious and approachable way. And I feel like this is the kind of attention to detail that we now need in businesses that are opening up, because the landscape has changed. The definition of success is changing. The barrier to entry hasn't changed.
Exactly that type of education is what we need. I agree with you entirely. And even just having a link to somebody to be able to send it to a client and say, look, you can do it like this.
Yeah.
And it's easy. Brian, if you're interested enough, you want to take the time, And I think, like you say, we're talking about everything is coffee. When I talk about coffee, I'm actually only talking about brewed coffee. And I don't make that public all the time. I don't say it all the time, but in my brain, that is what we're talking about. When we're talking about coffee. We're not talking about espresso. We're not talking about anything other than brewed coffee. So yeah.
We almost need to
maybe find some new words.
say that again.
I said education and maybe find some new words to replace the words that we're using that are not really saying what we want to say.
Yeah.
Such as having brewed coffee, not just coffee or geisha coffee. In my opinion, a brewed coffee. So it should, sure, it works in espresso. It does, but I love it brewed. I say again, like you also. I'm a brewed coffee person, not so much an espresso person.
Yeah, so. I find it a bit aggressive. And I remember the first time I saw somebody drink an espresso made from a geisha and had put oat milk in it. And I was not able to have a conversation with that person.
Wow. Espresso with oat milk. Wow.
Espresso, but a geisha espresso with oat milk in it.
No, I mean, that's why, yeah, no.
Like we just,
I know. To me, it's a little bit hard. I drink them because because my coffee and the florals in them. It's just that they're aggressive, like you said. There's a little, the acidity is a lot if you want to drink it that way.
It's just anyone who's going to have a geisha espresso with oat milk in it, that tells me everything I need to know about your personality and will tell me ahead of time. We're probably not going to agree on a bunch of shit.
I don't think that, well, I guess an espresso has to be served with milk if they want it. I don't think I would be like, no, here, you can have
right? Like that's the perfect kind of date key indicator. Take someone. Yeah. How do you approach your geisha?
Yeah.
Oh, dear. So you used a term that I had never heard before. Well, you were the first person to use it, and it got me very curious. And this term is ultra specialty coffee.
That's odd. I don't think I'm sure I didn't make it up. Ultra specialty coffee is to me, it's 92 points or above. Ultra specialty coffee. Yeah.
And that's the basis of it. It's not like it's just a coffee that scores 92 plus.
I just threw out that term. I don't really think it means anything. But to me, in my brain, what it means is so we have quality indicators, let's say here. And if a coffee is like 93.5, it's because it has a group of attributes that is taking it to that price point. It has to have a group of attributes that are so outstanding that basically anybody can taste them. It's always going to be a micro lot. So ultra specialty coffee is usually not more than pounds at the most. But.
Right.
But in my brain, it's just something, we have our regular geishas that can go anywhere from 87 points to, let's say, 91 and a half, 92. And then there's the outliers, the ones that are really high up there and they're very, they're far in between, they're not common. That's ultra specialty to me. That's why when I say ultra specialty is the ones that get the $400 or the $1,300 with 50 cents.
Yeah.
That's those coffees.
With the coffee market booming across Asia. And like I looked at your auction results from July. And pretty much all of them, and the same with the best of Panama, a lot of them, the top selling coffees went to Asian countries. Do you think that that's going to continue to be the trend into the future?
And I didn't explain why. I started going to Japan in 2006 or 2007. I can't remember precisely. I started going to Korea 2009 or I don't remember precisely either. But I do remember the first time I went to China, which was in 2011. And China, I went to Beijing and Shanghai. And both of them, I was taken by somebody who was at that moment was a coffee professional at SCAA.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and she was Chinese, and she took me to a couple of different places. I tasted the coffees. In my opinion, the roasts were, except for a couple of places, really bad. They served you, you know, a sip of coffee with all of this foamy stuff on top, and it was undrinkable. Mm-hmm. 2011. I think I went back in 2000, and I'm going to say 15 or 14. I can't remember which one. And the world had changed in 3 years, 4 years. And all of a sudden, they were buying these specialty coffees. They had roasters set up. They had cafes, just gorgeous cafes. And the reason that I think it will continue is because they did not. The difference between the U.S. and China is that they didn't start on the 50-cent coffees. Yeah. That's not part of their culture. They don't. And even though it is a culture of instant coffee, for example, they didn't drink a lot of instant coffee or a lot of food, for that matter. So you'll have the instant coffee in the hotel. But outside of that, a lot of places are just going to get good coffee. And so these people grew up or started to learn about coffee with good coffees. Yeah. So yes, they see it as wine. They don't see it as the commodity that a lot of the Western countries see it as a commodity. And it should have a commodity price. And that's why we're not breaking away from that. But Asia, in general, is not like that. Japan, yes, has had a coffee culture for much longer. And it's a little bit harder there. Mm-hmm. The other countries, Taiwan, if you're going to consider it separate, you know, and China, mainland China, Korea, they're just growing with coffee. They see it as a wine. It's a specialty item. It's not a commodity, again.
It's an experience. From everything that I keep talking to people about in China, is that coffee is something that's a moment to be experienced and revered.
And in addition, they're going to see it like their tea, if they see it like anything. So their tea is just something that is magnificent. They know it. They sell it in their local auctions for crazy prices, but it's a respected product. So coffee falls there too, which is very fortunate, obviously, for coffee producers.
Yeah, and which makes sense as to why most coffee producers are who do have these ultra specialty coffees and high-end coffees are heading in that region to sell their coffees. And it just makes sense. Even when it's sold here and people offer a cup of coffee for $100 a cup, it makes the news. It makes the local news. Whereas those kinds of experiences are not that way in many parts of Asia.
Yeah. Again, I don't know. The U.S. for the last 16 years has had different moments like this where they come on TV because this coffee is this much money. Ever since the 21 or way back, I think we were first in 2006. And I remember getting up to watch because somebody had taken it to NBC, ABC, CBS. I don't remember. I lived in Puerto Rico, so I did have that channel, and I get up to watch because it was like at 6:30 in the morning that they were going to pass it. And the anchor's like, I don't know. And I've seen that over and over again. I'm like, well, I'm not going to go on national TV just for a news anchor who doesn't really know anything about coffee and a place to say, I don't like it that much.
Yeah. So. We have almost hit our limit in time, which has flown, right?
Yes, it has. We've had a lot of different topics.
We have, but I've really enjoyed the conversation. Really, really enjoyed it.
As well.
Thank you. Yeah. Before we go, what are you hopeful for in the future when it comes to coffee?
I'm hopeful for a moment when we break away from the prices that are attached to a C market in New York or anything similar to that. I'm hopeful for a day where we look at coffee and we say, well, I would like a coffee similar to this quality. And we understand that in order to get it, we have to be able to make sure that the producer who produced that coffee and is selling it to the importer, to whoever, makes enough money to feed his family, to educate himself, and to make a decent living like everybody else in the industry wants.
Because they deserve to.
Of course they do. So that is what I'm hopeful for. I don't see it happening very soon, but I do think it might happen in our lifetime. Let's keep our fingers crossed for that.
What a perfect place to end the conversation. Rachel Peterson, thank you for giving so generously of your time and your wisdom. I think you're an absolute fucking badass. And
Thanks for watching.
I hope.
And I'm going to hold you to that bottle.
Oh, I'm
Elixir.
sending you an Elixir trio as soon as I get your address. Done, lady.
I'll get you that
Done.
as soon as I can. Thank you very much.
I hope we get to have a coffee soon together. I don't know which decade that'll be given the current situation.
Maybe hopefully next year in Australia.
That'd be fantastic. I hope so. Have a wonderful day.
Take care.
Peace, love, and peanut butter, everyone. Have a great day. Bye, darling.